school and community connection is such a important and often overlooked connection. And that's why we're so excited to have Danny Kirk, Manager of Makerspace Programs, New York Hall of Science. Danny, please join me on the session stage. And his colleague Vargas, the Makerspace Coordinator from the New York Hall of Science. So Danny and Vargas are going to lead us through this presentation, which I'm so excited about. Welcome, Danny and Vargas. I can see you well. And I'm so excited for this, and I want to give you the most time possible. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Danny, and I'm going to drop off in a moment. Thank you to all of you who started putting stuff in the chat, and keep it going. Latanya is our chat moderator, and she's all over it. Danny, it's all yours. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Roger, and Latanya, thank you for moderating for us. That's super, super helpful. And to Schools That Can, thank you for having us. We're super excited to be here. I was telling Roger when we were organizing this that a lot of the presentations we were going to be doing this summer are all canceled. And so to have an opportunity to share this work and talk to people about the ways, in general, the amazing work that these students have done, and then how we as facilitators are thinking about transitioning that work to continue to meet this community's need and be the amazing program that they've come to expect, even in a time when we can't actually be meeting together. So I'm super excited to share that with you all today. Maybe throw like here, I'll put a thumbs up in the chat. Copy and paste that thumbs up if you've ever been to either the Hall of Science or the Makerspace before. I'll kind of keep an eye on that as it goes. But in general, we are from the New York Hall of Science in Queens. It's one of my favorite museums in New York, certainly one of the most hands-on, innovative spaces for young people to come and learn about science and making and building and creating new things. Our space within the museum is the Makerspace. So I like to describe us as being kind of a hands-on learning space that stretches across the tool spectrum. So we're working with everything from digital making to textile design to art to 3D printing to woodworking, kind of a little bit of everything. And in everything that we do, we're thinking about how do we give young people the ability to think critically about using tools to solve problems. And so we see our job at least as being to teach them these skills, and it's their job to think about how to creatively apply them. And so we apply that model to pretty much everything that we do. And I want to talk a little bit specifically today about our Innovation Institute program and how we have continued to use that model in that program, even when we haven't been able to meet physically with our young people that we're working with. There we go. So I'm going to start with just a quick little introduction video just about the I2 program in general. So I2, Innovation Institute, you'll hear me refer to it as I2 mostly. This is our year-long high school after-school. Right now, it is a computational thinking and digital making program. I'll talk a little bit about in a second how that is sort of a new twist to this program. We're on our 5th iteration. But this is the first time that we've really focused intentionally and specifically on digital making skills. So this video will introduce you a little bit to the program as it's run in the past and sort of what the overall goals are there.
Innovation Institute is a program that we run here at the New York Hall of Science, and it focuses on a cohort of teens that work with us and the local community to create and devise a process or product that in some way benefits the community or expands the possibilities that this community has. Innovation Institute is really centered around the idea that STEM learning could be accessed by anyone.
I'm really focused and aiming to help the community because I really want my sister and my brother to grow up in a community that is better than mine. So I'm really like hopeful that things that I do here, I will learn from and gain experience and do things elsewhere that could also help other communities.
I don't think I would have gotten these opportunities in school. This program has taught me how to think and like to prototype before I make or design something. It taught me how to expand my ideas to get different views from other peers, and that would help you develop a better prototype or design for your community or yourself.
This program has taught me that design and making is way more important than just creating things. It actually helps the world around us and improves our way of life.
STEM learning is definitely on the tip of everyone's tongue right now. It's really important that we take STEM as a cross-disciplinary learning process, and to give access to that process to the kids in our local community, but also in the community in New York City as a whole.
This experience changed my life for the better. It got me more interested into the STEM field and got me on track to like see what I would do in college. I honestly don't think that high school or any other program would expose me to this.
The work that they do here is something that comes from their interests, so they can use it for their college transcripts, for their resumes, to kind of enhance the idea that they have been employees of a cultural institution such as NYSCI and worked within the community to integrate cross-disciplinary STEM learning, and then they could bring that back to their schools, or they could share that with their community, and also extending into their college and hopefully their career paths.
I would recommend it to other high school students, and it's way more fun than school.
So that you can ignore that link. Actually, that's outdated information. So as you hear David, the director of Maker Programming, in that video discussing, and some of the young people in the video discussing, we are thinking really critically about how to give these people the skills to look at the world around them and make choices and think about the things that they want to improve. And so at its core, we're helping them develop these critical thinking skills. And so the tools have been able to vary over time. So in past iterations, it's, as you can see in some of these photos, the tool focus has been maybe more hands-on woodworking type tools. But again, we're teaching them a thinking process, and that thinking process can be applied in a wide variety of ways. So these are some examples of applications of those skills that we've had from previous iterations. In the top left, you can see some young people who started a company. Basically, they were interested in designing, redesigning the way that sex education is presented to young people and high schoolers, and doing it from a really student-first perspective. And so they designed that curriculum, and they started this sort of, their process and their product was the curriculum and this sort of company that formed around it. And then we have in the bottom right, you can see the presentation. So when the Hall of Science hosted Maker Faire in the past, we used this as an opportunity for the students to present. As Vargas will talk about in a little while, we've moved that presentation opportunity online now to continue to give them the chance to share their work with a wider audience. This year, what's changed and is what's new and what's exciting about this program is that we've been giving funding to specifically look at and research the way that computational making and digital making and computational thinking skills, how can those types of digital skills specifically and intentionally enhance these types of critical thinking abilities? And how can working in a digital way give young people both a set of tools to use to solve problems, right? Like you have these digital tools and you can use them to solve problems, but they're also learning through using those tools how to think in a new way. And to illustrate that, what I'm hoping to do today and what I'm hoping that Vargas will do in her section of the presentation is we're going to talk about what we did as facilitators and sort of what we've set up for these people, but I want to really turn it over to the young people themselves to talk about what that impact was. And so we have a lot of videos. We interviewed a couple of our students and cut those interviews together in a way that sort of reflects the impact of the work that we've done. And so to start that, I want to introduce two of those students. So we have, we're going to be chatting a bit today with Kai and James. And to start, Kai and James are going to give you a little bit about, in their opinion, what is this program all about? And I kind of asked them, if you were to pitch this program to somebody who's never heard of it before, how would you describe it? And how would you describe the impact that it had? So here's Kai to start us off.
Yeah, sure. I think I'd first like to start about like all the skills that you learn. For example, I think you want to first, or for me, probably want to like focus on like the skills such as, you know, the 3D modeling, the 3D printing, the ability to sort of capture like your vision, sort of like abstract terms and sort of these concrete ideas by using like software such as AutoCAD or the Tinkercad and, you know, PSJ5, like all those skills. I think for me, I think it's just trying to like envision your ideas and put them into like concrete things using like these skills and be able to bring them out into reality and do the design process.
And then in this video, you'll hear James talk a little bit about, for him, it was what stood out and what's different. James is very familiar with programs like this. He's been in Mouse and other similar tech-based making programs. And I like this video because it talks about what really stands out, and what is important to us, again, is that ability for young people to make choices. And I think that is really reflected well in what James has to say here.
There's like more autonomy in this program. Like it's structured, but like the basic is like, hey, we're gonna like teach you this, but like you can do whatever you want with that. Usually they've been like, you're gonna learn these skills and you're gonna do this, but you like learn the skills and then you figure out what you want to do, which hasn't really been like a big part of programs I've been a part of before. It's kind of just, you're gonna learn how to use like Tinkercad or whatever program, and then you're gonna do this specific project. But this one, you learned all of these skills, and then towards the end, you figure out what you want to do.
What do you think about that? Like as a process for yourself, as someone who likes to do things in this world?
Definitely more enjoyable, because I've never liked how constricted other programs were. Because like I don't like doing what other people tell me to do. That's really boring.
And so you can kind of see it reflected there a little bit. I just want to give James I'm excited to be able to share James's story. James came into the program as sort of the most classic teen you could possibly ask for, in terms of you know, having this sort of too cool for school attitude, and even when he was very obviously interested in what we were doing, he consistently had to pretend that it wasn't cool. And so hearing James, this was recorded last week, and so hearing James now at the end of the program talk in this open way about this program, even with that tinge of sarcasm that's still there and probably always will be, I think is really valuable. And it just sort of like enhances his story even more. So how do we do this? I'm going to spend a couple minutes now talking about what things look like in the before times, before the museum closed. And then I'll turn it over to Vargas to talk about how we intentionally made this transition over into digital programming. So the program is set up and has been set up pretty consistently in this way. So we start off with a week-long boot camp. During this boot camp, we take the kinds of activities and ideas and thinking processes that we're going to explore over the whole year and just kind of blast through them really quickly. And so we get a sense very quickly of where the group is at, what they kind of are already bringing to the table, what skills are they most excited about, what are the ways that we can utilize those skills as we move forward in the program, and then also what are the things that we think we might need to push on, what are kinds of the areas that around tech skills, tool skills, collaboration skills, presentation skills, what are the things that are going to be the main pushes for us as facilitators as we move through this program. To do that, we started, we started right off the bat by doing a lot of systems thinking and systems exploration. We did exercises like this pen dissection based on some of the work of Agency by Design, looking at the parts and pieces of this system and exploring the complexities that exist within them, and thinking about how you can take that same type of systems thinking and begin applying it at a larger scale. And how can you use that in all of the different activities and processes and projects that you make your way through. And so they then began a week-long project that kind of reflected the type of group work and prototyping work that they would be doing throughout the program. So we asked them to, okay, sorry, I was just checking the chat. We asked them to design a game that would teach someone something. And the someone and the something and the process of the game is completely up to them. We wanted to think about how to get them thinking beyond that learning can kind of be this expansive process, and that teaching someone something doesn't necessarily have to be teaching them math. And so we did see some math games. We also saw games that were about teaching Morse code. And so kind of an interesting stretch of things there. They started by doing an analog prototype based on their own problem statements that they designed based on thinking of a user and what they would be teaching that user. They then had the opportunity to think about how would they take that digital prototype, and as you see here, turn it into, or take that analog prototype and turn it into a digital game. So we use software called ReadyMaker to design a digital version of those analog games. So this is Dizzy Math. This is the digital version of this on the right, this sort of spinning cardboard thing turned into this game here. And similarly, the Morse code game that was originally modeled with LEDs and sort of copper tape became this digital Morse code test game. We then had them present these games that they designed. And so again, we're moving through the whole process that we would be going through in a more in-depth way throughout the whole year. They're designing something, they're prototyping it, they're testing it, then they're presenting it. We, as facilitators, learned a lot. We were able to see, the skills that we would need to really push them on. And I think that for the group, they also started to learn a lot. They had the opportunity to see some of the challenges of digital programming and the ways that things like troubleshooting or forgetting to save can be some of the biggest challenges you face. It's not, the challenges might not be conceptual, they might be technical. And so introducing them to all the different types of challenges that they might be encountering as they move through the rest of the program. Let's see. So after that, we moved from the boot camp into what we kind of describe as the skill building portion of the program. So this is where we spent most of the year, and where the students got the opportunity to start diving into some of these tool skills. Something that I think is really important to talk about when we talk about tool skills and tool skill building is, again, like I mentioned at the beginning, it's not really for us about the specific tools. I think that the computational stuff is very interesting. I think the digital making stuff is very interesting. I think that young people connect with it. So really, though, I think what it's about is how we think while we're using these tools. And so for us, we're thinking about what are going to be the tools that are most accessible, and what are going to be the tools that are easy for beginners, and what are the things that are going to help support their deeper thinking over the course of the program. But what we really are looking for are the things that they're going to be excited about, and the things that are going to make them want to learn more and want to be part of this and want to connect. And so we're thinking about, what are the things that young people already like? They like video games, they like music, they like art and things like that. And so how can we find those intersections of music and art and coding and digital design in a way that's going to make them excited? We want them to care so that they want to learn more. And I found, and I think from working with other facilitators at the Hall of Science and in general, the best way to do that is to start with things that they already care about. And so I think what was very valuable there, and what James is going to illustrate here, is that I think was kind of new for a lot of these young people, being able to see these intersections between STEM and the things that they're already interested in. And so like James, like James describes here.
The fact that like these types of projects don't only involve like making websites and coding and like all this like stuff that I didn't enjoy for a really long time. Like I took like computer science for 2 years because I thought it was like something that was super enjoyable and I would totally love it, and I hated it. Then I got into like started doing other programs. I was like, no, you can like still be in STEM and still be like creative and just like work with young people rather than having like just like teachers talking at you and like getting upset that you don't understand how to code. Yeah, also like being in like a program that's like with young people is very different, because it's just like most of my teachers have been like really annoying white dudes that like I don't want to deal with.
So again, James in true James form there. And that has been very, lol, James is right. Is very able to express this idea that like, in his mind, this was not for him until he realized it was completely for him because he found an entry point that made sense. And from talking to him, it's clear that that entry point had not been available previously. And so how can you all, as facilitators of programs like this, think about that and think about what are those entry points that are going to get the Jameses in your group? Someone earlier mentioned in the chat, we all have a James in our class. What are those entry points that are going to get that James type excited and wanting to continue to learn more? And for that, so the way I, my sort of like fun little thing here, going beyond Blink. So again, indicate in the chat, how many of you have worked with Arduino before and had the first introduction to Arduino being Blink and LED? Throw it in the chat. Give me some sort of something. So that is generally the starting place for most people. And I'll be honest, that was my starting place, and I thought it was incredibly boring. And I've heard that from a lot of people. So why, if we're looking to get a young person excited about this tool that has so many amazing possibilities and has so many ways for them to use it to, so I'm seeing some I have not. So for context, an Arduino is a microcontroller board that allows young people, old people, whomever, to really quickly start prototyping electronics using different types of inputs and outputs. So it's a really easy way to jump into using it's almost exactly the same as a microbit, if you're more familiar with that tool. It does a lot of the same stuff. It's kind of like an earlier version and was sort of first on the scene in the way that microbit is now the leader. And so it allows a really quick introduction to jumping into creating digital systems and electronic systems. But doing that in a way by just blinking an LED, I don't think is that exciting. And so we spent a long time with Arduino, but we did not start in that way. We started by having them go online and research a project with Arduino that they thought was cool, and just pick something that they thought was interesting and go on Instructables and recognize that there are a ton of people out there doing this. The community exists already. Take advantage of it and connect with it and find something that you're excited about, and then we'll try and make it work. And that was really challenging for them. And that type of challenge, I should say, was really valuable because it gave us an opportunity to see how do they independently teach and learn themselves? And then also, how do we fade in scaffolding to support their work versus having to fade out scaffolding? So if you're starting with something like Blink, you're giving a ton of scaffolding up front and then fading that out as skills build. For us, we thought it would be more interesting to flip that and start in a challenging place and fade that scaffolding in as needed to give them the space to teach themselves things so that we are not doing all that work for them. And I think that works. I think that when you hear the young people talk about the way they think about this program, I am happy to say that I think that fading in of scaffolding was very valuable for them and allowed them to be more creative and constructive as they design their own independent final projects. I'm going to do one more James video, and then I'm going to hurry up to make sure Vargas has time.
Well, in like the beginning, like boot camp, we did like a lot of learning about brainstorming and design process, which definitely sets you up for later in the program, because those skills, like you needed those skills for the entire program. So when you like got the basis of design thinking and brainstorming and how to like think about problems and how to think about how you're going to solve them, then they set you up for the rest of the programs.
And so like James describes, you know, that ability to think creatively and like Aubrey is mentioning in the chat, to take ownership of your own learning and make these independent choices was incredibly valuable. And in my opinion, they would not have designed the types of final projects that they ended up designing had they not had that opportunity to practice those thinking skills previously. The final portion of the program that we're in right now is all about these final projects and presentations. So we focused, to do that, we've got them thinking about designing and collaborating, communicating, and how do they work as a group. So here, this was a fun thing that we did to get them thinking about user-centered design work. They made themselves the users and had to redesign our classroom space to make it more effective for the work that they were doing. We've also built these skills through community walks. So we take them out into the neighborhood and have them actually walk around and explore the things that they see around them, and take on what Kai will describe in a second as an observational lens, and develop this skill of observing the world around them and thinking about how to use their skills to impact that world. So Kai here, let's do this one.
I think we talked about the design process like a few months back. I think understanding of that, as well as, you know, looking at the world in like sort of an observational lens, I think like those sort of like skills are, I think, you know, I'm probably going to be using forward just to be able to like design things using design process like brainstorming, you know, prototyping, et cetera, et cetera. I think those are really, you know, useful skills for, you know, future projects you might, you know, endeavor in, or like other, also like observational skills, like looking at the world like more like relevant lenses. To see like, you know, what solutions or what problems it's solving, and, you know, what, you know, people aren't doing. Just, you know, things like that.
And I'll also add, I really love that phrase, observational lens, and that was actually something that Kai himself just said. That wasn't prompted, and that wasn't something that I actually had said to him previously. So that lens, I think, is very valuable as they move into their final project. So the last portion of the program and where we're at right now is they took the kind of system analysis and process that we've been doing throughout and applied it to their own world and their own communities. And starting at a really high macro level, starting to look at these big community systems and then break them down into specific parts and the complexities that exist within those parts. Again, this is inspired by Agency by Design's thinking routine work, which if you want at the end, I can share some links. So getting them to come to a place of connecting to one specific aspect of the systems that they're a part of that they want to have impact on. And from there, this is important. This is perhaps the most important slide. I'd say the most important thing I've learned from these young people is that a presentation is bad unless it has GIFs in it. So I added a GIF. And I chose this GIF because I like to think about what we're doing as facilitators for the majority of this program is setting up a path for these young people. And we're giving them this path that they can follow, but it's going to take them wherever they end up choosing to go. And maybe they're going to get off that path. And I think that is incredibly true considering what has happened in the world in the last few months, that this path has completely changed. And I wish I had a GIF of this path exploding or something, because it's gone completely off the rails. And so right as they had begun working on their final projects, we had put them into groups based on the brainstorming that they did and notes that they had taken and reflections that they had had on what they were most excited about. And Vargas and I then worked together to kind of take that and cull that information and put them into groups based on general interests. And from there, allow them to even further refine those general interests into the specific problem that they would be interested in solving. So this is just the 4 groups that we created. One was going to generally focus on environmental health and pollution. One was focusing on school and school-related stress. One was focusing on sustainability. And one was focusing on sort of community and culture and respect within cultures and communities. And then things went off the rails, as I mentioned, and as everyone here obviously knows. And I think I'm not going to say that anything about that was good, but I will say that I was very happy about where our young people were when that happened, because I think that if ever there was a time for creative thinking and creative problem solving and being, thinking critically about how to solve problems in the world around you, now is that time. And I think that we had created a group of young people that was ready to do that. And they were, they had the creative thinking and critical thinking and observational skills that they needed to think about how to transform their work, and also think about how to continue to have impact on the world, being that it is so different. And so I want to end with this one more James video and then turn it over to Vargas to talk a little bit about actually how we made that transition and what steps we took to continue to be intentional and supportive of our community, even when we could not see them consistently. So let me.
Do you feel like there are ways that going through this program and the activities we did, do you feel like there are ways that you think or ways that you might solve a problem now that are different than you would have, 7 months ago?
I don't know. Mm-hmm. Probably, but I haven't. It just became like an unconscious thing.
What do you mean by that?
Where we did this type of thinking and problem solving in the program. So then when we reached our final project, it was okay, this is how we've been solving the problems for the past 7 months. Why are we going to do it any differently now? So then it just became an unconscious thing. Yeah. And our entire group, we were talking and we knew before we started the program, we would have approached everything much differently. And it would probably have been a lot messier.
Great. So with that, James made it very clear. We've set them up to have the right mindset to go into this. And it was a challenge. And so Vargas, I'll turn it over to you and jump over. Oops. Do you want to start with the video or start with the slide?
Let's start with the video. And so I wanted to show all of you sort of where previous to quarantine and the lockdown, and how they saw NYSCI and the space that we created foster all of that entry points into learning, like Danny had mentioned. So let's listen to Kai describe what was special about NYSCI and the space we created for his interest in the
every day. I think that was pretty interesting. Yeah, pretty exciting, because I think you get to sort of be in a museum where there's no one else. That was sort of you're all alone. I think it really sort of fosters a sense of community and bonding, just because it's such a a novel place. Yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting.
What do you think was helpful about that for you, or how do you think that affected the work that you did?
I think just because around NYSCI, it's all about science, about innovation. I thought for that it just sort of was sort of relevant and unique, the setting that we were in and the project we were building on. Yeah.
And then COVID happened and the quarantine happened. So we wanted to build off of that sense of community that they were feeling, especially now being in groups and having to problem solve together and also think about what their solution is and what even their problem that they're trying to address is. So we needed to figure out, well, what is that transition going to look like from this really amazing sense of physical and innovation community that we had fostered into a digital space where we could no longer congregate and freely share information and just coexist with each other as innovators, as like-minded people in a place that felt like that was interesting and novel to them as well. So we decided ultimately who's going to decide how we move forward. We're going to be the participants. It was going to be the teens. If they were going to continue to engage with the program, if they were going to keep showing up, then we had to show up for them and create any kind of support that would continue that commitment and that engagement that they had developed over the past 8 months. So I would love, Danny, if you could play the next comment that Kai had about how space supports community.
That makes sense. And you were saying it kind of helped like create a different kind of community with the group. Cool. That's cool. I appreciate that. I'm glad to hear that that's the case. I think that's definitely true. With that in mind, actually, just to transition a little bit, abrupt the group or the type of community that you feel like we've had.
Like now we're going like the digital realm. I think for that, like you really like lose that sense of connection. I think going like being at night site, you really help. It really, we're all together. We're all able to communicate with one another, and it just builds that sense of in a physical connection rather than like digital.
Yeah. And so how do you feel like that has affected your work either positively or negatively?
I think it really helped us like strengthen the communication we had, because beforehand, like we weren't really that, tight knit with, our digital communication, but now, we sort of found a place to use like software or apps such as Slack that helps us really, communicate with one another and like be able to sort of be accessible to one another for that project.
And so like Kai mentioned, he hit the nail on the head. It's ultimately communication and us supporting communication between ourselves, between their team members. So we created a community call and we set it up during the typical day that we would meet and around the time that we typically would meet as well, which is after school, and had them really just vent what the schools are doing to adapt their learning, what their home lives are like, if they're willing to share, and then how they themselves are connecting and trying to stay sane with siblings and now being surrounded by family all the time and having to share resources and space. We wanted to create a plan that would support, additional adult support of their projects, because they often explain that teachers were pretty inaccessible to them, even more so now in an online setting. And then also thinking about, well, a lot of them had physical models or projects that would have some sort of physical space or take up some physical space. And so we wanted to make sure we were showing up for them in terms of providing them materials or just better ways to connect to the internet or software so that they could complete their final project in some form. So that lent itself to having participants wanting to continue to engage. They appreciated that just that verbalization of our support and hearing them out. So we created structured meetings during the same times that we would meet in person, and still had sort of what the kids noted as being unique in their online experience, which was to just treat them as people and have sort of a casual entry point into the meeting, icebreakers and fun questions, and sort of just kind of a low stakes entry point into a typical day. And so, but it would still have to be a long Zoom session, which many of them experienced for even longer hours all day with their schooling. So I'd love to have James kind of comment on like why our Zoom meetings and our weekly sessions were a little bit different for him than a typical school day.
Yeah. Y'all like check in and be like, hey, how are y'all? This is the meeting. This is what's happening. The only like emails I've gotten are saying that like I'm like not doing well in my classes. I'm like really helpful.
Sorry, just to clarify. So you're saying like your school is only sending sort of like assignments.
Yeah. Like I'm only getting like PowerPoints that I'm not going to look at, or just like messages saying like I have work to do, and I'm just like that's not going to happen. But like when we have like a scheduled meeting of like people that I don't hate, like it's more enjoyable. It's just like, and also it's just not like one person talking for 3 hours.
Yeah. Which
is like
go ahead.
Not, like I was telling someone that I was like, oh, I have like a 3-hour Zoom meeting. And the idea of a 3-hour Zoom meeting is disgusting. But then it's like, no, I get to like talk to people and they're interesting, and I don't have to like listen to one person like spiel for like a long time.
I think many of us can relate to Zoom, to how we feel about Zooms and particularly James's take on it. So we structured those 3 hours into small breakout rooms where they'd have a dedicated adult guiding and just being a fly in the wall if needed on their processes. So there was structure, but there was freedom within that blocking off of time. And we always closed meetings with share outs so that people could hear out where other folks were at and sort of kind of gauge how their team was feeling. And it was just trying our best to replicate what an analog meeting would feel like, what our analog meetings feel like in sort of a digital space. And so in the final aspect of us transitioning, now that we have these structured meetings, now that everyone appears to be able to connect and speak with each other and share information, and team members can finally work on their final project, we also needed to understand whether their final projects would still exist in this new world. Were their projects still appropriate, and do they make sense in a world where folks can't interact physically for the most part in a room with other people? So we had all the teams regroup and sort of decide, like, will their projects still be able to be manifested and created in a way that is accessible for folks to interact with and that they can present about, which also led to a new layer. They need to be able to present with their team members and create a presentation about their final project while not being in the same room with each other, which they had never done before. And many of us also can relate to that as well. So an example of one team creating or adapting their final project to the new world was they wanted to create an online world where their students in a school could better interact with administrators and school staff and more importantly, teachers. And this is pre-COVID. They already thought that there was space for a digital tool to help improve communication between students and the adults in their lives. But it didn't address, or it wasn't in any relation to the pandemic, but they realized what they were truly creating was something that was supposed to improve the experience that they were having in school. Their project became even more pertinent to today's times. So they pivoted to redesign an online platform where they engage with their classes and engage with their teachers, because they found it, most schools were extremely lacking because it was unprecedented. So they wanted to create a platform that was more student focused and student facing to improve what they thought was a lacking learning environment. So with that, communication still became key in how these teams needed to reconfigure their final projects. And so, Danny, could you play the Kai's communication video, actually?
Yeah. And Vargas, just a heads up, we have like 10 minutes.
Great.
And save
actually, then let's instead, Kai had already expressed how communication was important, and same with James as well. So what I think, should we go to remote or kind of?
I would like to show. I do like this remote one just because it's sort of like, I think it's an interesting, like, I didn't expect this to be James's takeaway from working remotely.
Yes. So we can explain later or in the chat about some of the challenges the team members felt even within their own teams about difficulties connecting and communicating and staying accountable. But when some of those things are solved or supported, we can have James explain how remote work can work if we continue to solve for issues as they arise in an online platform.
Well, I think when we like switched to online stuff, the realization of, hey, you don't need to know the people in real life that you're working with. You could totally like work on really intense projects with people who don't live anywhere near you, which is like a realization that like I kind of like. I was like thinking about this because like how a lot of companies are switching to like employees in different countries, and that was like pissing me off. But I was like, hey, you can work on projects with people who aren't in your country, and you can network a lot more by just using technology, which I didn't think we realized was something we could do.
Great. And so the reason things worked was that we were constantly assessing and checking in with the staff members, with Makerspace staff about how these digital meetings were going. And so we wanted to continue to support that teamwork and that communication with a couple of key additions that or assets that we gave them, including a slide deck to help with their presentation, to sort of be a springboard for their own storytelling, because we know how important storytelling is to have folks connect with your ideas. We also provided them space in the meetings to kind of schedule out their work and sort of, and we did our best to model how to best schedule out your work so that you can accomplish quite a bit in a short amount of time. And then finally, I think the most key part in terms of having these different team projects be able to work on their final presentation, but also work on their final project were peer-to-peer feedback sessions, where they got to do sort of a quick run through of their presentation and what their project was, and then get immediate feedback from teams, from their peers, and then not even just feedback, but also be inspired by how some folks interpreted their projects and managed to communicate what their project would do and what was even the point of it, and who the audience would be through their presentations. So it was a really like kind of great cross-pollination of different teams in order to better their own presentations through that process. And I found that the most inspiring because the teams were truly learning from each other far more than we could have designed. They took what they could from it so that they can and are currently continuing to mold and shape their presentations as well.
Thank you so much, Vargas. I didn't mean to stop you. Were you wrapping up there?
I was basically wrapping up there, and I like Danny mentioned, I wanted to do a special kind of like mention and sort of another storytelling, like interesting tidbit is that James was our biggest wild card in terms of recruitment. He was correct in saying that he felt all over the place, and we kind of got a sense of we weren't sure how he would be interested in this program based on his attitude. And for me, he's kind of our like biggest proof that if you continue to listen and support people where they're at, and particularly these teens who may have abilities or most likely have capacity for this, but don't feel like this is for them, that this is who we best need to serve to make tech and STEM more accessible. And I super appreciate it as being a former James myself in high school and middle school, and a general terror to all my science teachers. So I truly appreciate, his feedback and how he has interpreted and engaged with our work.
Thank you so much. Thank you to both of you for touch with us. I think folks viewing really having those student voices, and there's been like and Latanya, if you post any questions right at the that would be great. I'd be so for your students, have you seen across the larger group of your students about the switch to digital, this idea of like stepping stepping into this kind of virtual action? Has it worked more broadly with all the students you work with?
I would say so. This is a generation that's born and bred into technology, so they're going to be our earliest and fastest adopters of any sort of tech that we throw at them. But thankfully they'll also be kind of the loudest voices of things that are not working. So they're great for prototyping these kinds of things out.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Something else that caught my eye was when you were talking, Danny, you were talking earlier about forming these to digital, and that's going to be such a big issue for teachers thinking about what can they take online, what digital format. And we heard from James about how if they just, teachers are just throwing digital platforms at them without the kind of community and without the social emotional support, we know that's not going to work. And it seems like you're talking here about students to be part of this process themselves.
Yeah.
All ages can be part of the transforming activities to digital. I mean, I think maybe that's a rhetorical question, but like how young can that work maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting question, and something that we're certainly, this is one of our high school programs, but we work with kids across, all ages. And so we've been thinking a lot for our younger programming, what does that look like? And how do you do this in that same sort of intentional way? Because I think there are a lot of unknowns. The one known at this point, I think, is that it doesn't work very well if the people aren't connected already, or if you don't take the time within the experience to build that connection between the people. Because otherwise, it's such a strange way of working and communicating that if you don't have that trust, I think it can be really challenging. And then I'm also, though, like Vargas said, like, for example, my mom teaches preschool, and like, those preschool kids are Zoom pros now. Like they're like these young, I think that the benefit we have as educators who are not, elementary schoolers right now is that they have more expertise than us in a lot of settings. And so I forget where in the chat, but someone was being like, that sense of like, it's okay not to know things and to say you don't know them. Let them teach you. And so let them be the teacher in the sense of like, what is the thing that is going to work most? Is there a way that you can send me questions? Of course, you can send us both questions at our emails that I'll put in the chat right now.
Ooh. Please do. Please do that, but put it in the chat right now if you have a burning question. Please do. We've got a couple minutes left. We can go a little bit past 12. So we've got some time, folks. Please share your question if you've got a burning question for Danny or for Vargas. Aubrey's talking about making online. I wish the online platforms were a bit more kid friendly.
Yeah.
Yeah. You guys have anything to say on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say they're barely human friendly.
Yeah.
There clearly needs to be work, kind of not even refining, but finding. We are not computers. I mean, we've designed these computers, but it's just a small subset of people are the folks who are designing computers and designing software that need more human input in terms of how we interact with it. I'd love for some certain aspects to become more ubiquitous, but as more and more technology gets developed, the boots on the ground are the kids who have to constantly interact with it, and they will be ultimately the experts. Because they'll be the ones who adapt and latch onto things, and then other things will die, and sort of like that evolution will continue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good. Other questions here, but I did have one thing I wanted to make sure I asked you while we're waiting to watch for any other questions. It's about teachers. So you've shared some powerful examples of the work that New York College of Science is doing, working with schools, and maybe you have a somewhat of an advantage of being an out of school people of individuals that are not people that are engaging within their school community ecosystem bubble, their school bubble. Maybe that's the best word. All the time that don't have those same pressures, and you can be like that other person to talk to. Thoughts about, can teachers take what you're doing? I think the idea of the observational lens, engaging with the community problems, there's so many powerful ideas here. Can teachers take most of these ideas and run with them themselves?
Yeah,
Have
absolutely.
you seen that happen?
So, not to be like too pluggy, but I will say that like we do as a Makerspace team, we do a ton of professional development work. And in that work with educators, this is exactly the type of stuff that we're focusing on, is how do we support educators and their ability to take this step back and let go and be able to have these types of open-ended experiences with the young people that they work with, and to engage in these types of conversations and these moments of like, I don't know, let's learn together. I think that I found working with teachers that is often very challenging because of the environment of a public school in particular. There isn't a lot of space in that environment for not knowing things and for that sense of discomfort. And so it can be a challenge, I think, for teachers to, from what I've seen, it's challenging for teachers often to kind of step back in that way. And so I think it is 100% doable, but I think it's really challenging, and that it takes sort of a brave teacher to push back against that environment and say, like, I am open to trying this, even though it's a little uncomfortable making.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And teachers have so much on their plate right now. We know that. And, I just definitely want to highlight that what we've seen throughout this forum is so much resonance with your comment about comfort plus trust plus community. I mean, we've had, that's been a thread running through so many sessions, that students and parents and everyone is being really challenged by where we are. And it's how can we create connection and take academics and put those, hold those off to the side a little bit, focus on connections first, which it looks like that's what you've been successful at, and then bring in the learning in ways that work for students.
How do we stay connected with students? So we were lucky in the sense that we never actually went to their schools. They always came to us. So we pulled from a lot of different schools and they came to us. And so we we had already developed a communication network via email with them. So we were in touch consistently already. And that wasn't like I send them, Vargas sends them, the other folks on the research team, we send them emails probably once a week anyway. So we were already in pretty consistent communication. And so that made the transition a little bit easier in that sense, in that we already knew that if we reached out to them, they would probably be responsive.
Great. And then I guess one last thing maybe I'd bring in too is you talked about in the description about how this prepares students for career paths. How does that part of the work maybe change? And have you had any contact with industry or professionals since this started about how all these connections and basically this education employment pathway, which schools again is so focused on, how this is transforming?
So I should add that during the program in general, one part that I didn't quite mention is that we connect with folks in the field in a variety of different ways to do interview. We bring them in to do, like, the students can interview them or they can present their work. So we had someone from Matter Hackers, who is it's a company in the 3D printing industry. She came and spoke with us. We had the artist who designed a piece of software called P5JS, which is a JavaScript-based art design software. It's free online. She designed it and came and spoke with us. We've in the past taken groups to places like IDEO and other design-based firms to get them thinking along those lines. So we work to just make those connections off the bat during the course of the program, and are thinking right now about what is that going to look like if we were to run this program digitally down the line? What types of connections can we be making to those organizations? We're also going to be bringing in previous I2 participants to do sort of a panel with the current students about just that, kind of like, what does this look like after the fact, and how do you take this experience and put it on a resume, put it on a job application, put it in a cover letter? Like, how do you kind of translate it to other people?
Right. Wow, that's so powerful. So powerful. Good. Well, just as we want to respect everyone's time, give everyone a chance to do some networking and expo exploration before next session. Vargas, did you have any final words you want to put in?
Danny and I have been in a lot of communication and constant state of iteration when it comes to this project. So we're very happy to share with all of you what we've learned and had to learn very quickly, and share listening to our students as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, thank you both. Really appreciate everything you shared.